Hello and welcome to this special edition of Altitude. Last year we came here to DroneX at London's Excel, and we're back to find out what's been happening in this exciting area of the aviation industry. One of the companies at the forefront of drone delivery are Manna, and I'm joined by their Chief Technology Officer, Alan Hicks. Alan, welcome to Altitude.
Hi, thank you very much.
Alan, we're here at DroneX. How are you finding the show?
Great, yeah. I was just actually saying to a few people, it's way busier than the previous years I've been, so it's really exciting to be here today.
And Alan, you are doing something that a lot of people here at the show would love to be doing. You're making deliveries in one of Europe's capital cities, Dublin, flying drones beyond the line of sight of the pilots. How have you achieved that?
Yeah, time. I think time. We've been doing this for 5 years now, and we've a small team, but a really, really good team. And we put a lot of work into building a drone that's really reliable to fly over people, and we've built up a really good relationship with the local regulator, the IAA. And then obviously everything we do with them is portable across Europe. So yeah, I think, as everybody says in aviation, crawl, walk, run. And we started off slow, and we're now flying beyond visual line of sight with remote pilots controlling multiple drones at a time and delivering to real customers.
And what are some of the biggest things that you've learned along that journey?
Patience. I think patience and persistence. I mean, I think the technology is all there. I think making it reliable is really, really challenging. And I think everybody sees the hardware of the drone as the most difficult piece, and it is a really difficult piece, but there's actually a huge amount of software underneath that actually powers the entire business. And it's very different doing 5 flights in a day as a once-off kind of spin-up for a weekend to demonstrate drone delivery. We've been doing this now for 3 years in live operations, done 200,000 flights, and the learning you get after 6 months of doing something on repeat, it's incredible. And I think that's probably where we've learned the most in our live operations.
And so with 200,000 flights taking place, how are they controlled? Where's the pilot?
Yeah, so that's in our operation in Dublin. And, you know, obviously doing 200,000 flights, you know, if you were doing that with humans, it would take a lot of manual effort. So we've automated the system completely. So we have one person that is responsible for 4 aircraft in a monitoring capacity, and that's a remote person. So all they have is a computer display on front of them, and they're monitoring 4 to 8 aircraft at a time. And that's how we scale up the operation. And without that, it's not commercially viable.
And how does it work from a practical perspective? So if I'm a customer and I want to get a delivery from Manna, what happens?
So it's dead easy. I mean, we have a customer-facing app, a bit like one of your typical food aggregator apps. You go on, you select your restaurant, you order as you would normally. Literally the only difference is it comes in 2 minutes, 40 seconds, and it's delivered into your garden with no humans.
Sounds absolutely incredible. You mentioned 200,000 flights. We know that social acceptance is one of the key challenges that faces the drone industry. What have you done with regard to managing noise and privacy issues in Dublin?
Yeah, I mean, it's key. Noise is the big one, and people are obviously, you know, concerned about that. What we do is we engage heavily with a community before we enter a community. So, for example, in Dublin, we've just opened up a second site about 1 kilometre away from where our current site is. So we now have 2 sites operating in kind of dual areas, which is really cool. But before we went there, we engaged with the community. We said, you know, we're Manna, we're drone delivery. These are the benefits. You know, any concerns you have, all that sort of thing. We also do a lot with our routing algorithms. So we ensure that we don't fly over the same area more than once in 2 hours. And we distribute our traffic. So our drone, we're lucky, it's very quiet. It's very big, but it's very quiet. So when it's in the sky, you don't hear it. So it's really when the delivery comes down to someone's house that the neighbors would hear it. But it's, you know, it's only there for a few seconds. And once people understand what it is, it's absolutely no problem.
And what sort of feedback do you get from people? Because I can imagine a sort of sense of curiosity, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, at the start, it's a novelty. And we survey every single customer that we deliver to, even now, 3 or 4 years later. and we rank our delivery, and we get them. We ask for feedback all of the time, and it's great. It's a great ego boost because everybody's giving you tens, but there's actually real insight there into customers, and they're like, oh, thankfully it was hot, and hot food is the number one kind of comment we get, or cold ice cream. And they're like, it's the quality of food customers actually appreciate. Like we thought it would be the speed, and it is the speed to a certain extent, but once customers get fast delivery, they expect it forever. So it doesn't become a selling point anymore. It's just an expectation, but it's the quality of the food that they really like.
And Alan, you mentioned the routing algorithm. You're Chief Technology Officer. What other technical challenges have you had to overcome, and what else is out there for you to resolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an array of technical challenges between hardware and software, and kind of and integration, and getting those to kind of mesh together really well in a safe way. And I think the challenge is, how do you move at a startup pace but at an aviation safety pace? And I think it's blending those two cultures together. And I think we've done that really well at Manna in terms of getting people from startup land and then experienced aviation people, and we've blended those together to form a very solid process of doing stuff quickly but extremely safely. And we've got a live test site that we do all our test flying on in Ireland, where we're doing hundreds of flights a week on new software and new hardware. And it's really, again, back to that crawl, walk, run. You just have to be safe.
So all of this is taking place in Dublin. Do you have plans to fly in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to fly in the UK. It'd be a huge market for us. I mean, we're a UK and Irish private company, and we have offices here, and we did a lot of flying here before for testing. We're working with the CAA closely, slightly different regulations than in Ireland with the IAA and in Europe. So once the regulations here scale enough that we can enter the market, we would absolutely be delighted to. In terms of, obviously, we're a startup, and like there's some other companies that have just announced operations now in the UK, which we're really excited about. And it's great. It's great from an industry perspective because all the companies are kind of, a rising tide raises all ships, So that's great. I mean, we're at a stage now where all of our operations need to be commercially viable because of our scale. We don't have the big deep pockets of some other kind of massive enterprises.
Alan, thank you so much for joining us on Altitude. It's been a pleasure.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Much is said about the commercial application of drones, but blue light services are also using them too. And I'm joined by David Walters from National Police Air Service. Hello, David, and welcome to Altitude.
Hi, Russell. Thank you for having me.
David, it's morning of the first day of the show. How are you finding it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great floor. It seems to be a little bit bigger than the ones we've seen over the years. And today I've actually brought my son Toby with. He's 9. He's a passionate aviation fan and a fan of drones. So yeah, we've had a good walk of the floor, and it seems to be a really great event.
So David, it sounds like you're having a really nice time here at the show already. Let's start with some information about National Police Air Service. What is it that you do?
So the National Police Air Service provide a mixture of rotary and fixed wing manned aircraft support to police. We support them with a wide variety of tasking, such as missing persons, pursuits, and the payload on our aircraft really enable them to have an eye in the sky view of such large areas when operating on these tasks.
And are you already using drones?
So the National Police Air Service currently don't operate drones. The National Police teams do operate drones, the smaller scale DJI, but in the future, MPAS envisages developing a blended fleet and the operation of uncrewed aircraft that will be an equivocal certified to our manned aircraft, similar to the aircraft that you can see behind us. It won't be this particular one, but it's a variety of this type of aircraft.
And what is it that the drones will offer that you can't have with from crewed aircraft?
So our crewed aircraft are currently limited with the rotary side of things for around about a 2-hour flight time due to the number of persons we have to have on board, plus the payload capabilities. And our trials that we're looking to operate within the sandbox next year really focus on those payload capabilities, not so much the aircraft, because we need to be able to deliver an equivocal capability and service that we do with our manned aircraft if we were going to move across to the uncrewed.
So you mentioned the sandbox trials, the Civil Aviation Authority's recent tranche of activities. What will you be doing in that sandbox?
So we're working with NATS, and the purpose of the trials is to deliver a BVLOS trial capability where MPAS as an organisation can understand if the art of the possible in the future is to deliver a blended fleet where we will operate uncrewed aircraft alongside our crewed aircraft for live tasking. The specific outcomes of the trials are going to be key to how we determine our future. The key thing for us is ensuring that the camera capabilities on our trial aircraft meet that and deliver the same output results as if it was our manned aircraft.
You mentioned there were a couple of terms that I heard there. Can you help unpack them a little bit? So what BV loss? Can you help our viewers out with what that means?
Yeah, so operating beyond visual line of sight. Now, BV loss can mean many different things to different people. It could be you're flying a drone behind a building. It could be you're operating a drone in a box remotely. The BV loss, when we use the term, is us flying over large distances. The trial area that we're looking to deploy is approximately 50 kilometers by 30 kilometers. So quite a large trial area where we will be operating quite sensitive radar technology on board the aircraft to support us with detecting other airspace users and ensuring that we're safe ourselves as well.
And so, given that that's the case, where will the pilot actually be located?
So we're looking to operate out of one of our existing MPAS bases because from a trial perspective, we could go and operate it in a benign environment. But as an organisation, we need to understand the whole kind of concept of what it means to operate this type of capability. So how do the ConOps work from us operating from an airbase where we're already operating helicopters? How do we structure and rotor our crew? So human factors is a really big thing for us to focus on because we're now going to be potentially operating an aircraft that before crews were used to operating for 2 hours. Now we have the potential for 8 hours. What does that structure look like?
You also mentioned another term, blended fleet, I think you called it. Well, can you help us out with that one as well?
Yeah, so the purpose of the blended fleet is we don't see the likes of the uncrewed aircraft replacing our manned aircraft fleets completely. The performance capabilities aren't there yet in industry with these uncrewed aircraft capabilities, so we still need the requirements of manned aircraft for some tasking. It isn't really an obvious tasking, but sometimes MPAS are involved in moving medevac patients. Sometimes we're required to support armed police with certain tasking types as well. So the crewed aircraft will still be around for a while, but it enables us to have such more of a flexible, cost-effective solution for our end customers, which are the police service themselves.
So if the trial goes to plan, when can we expect to see drones in the skies with your helicopters?
So we're working really closely at the moment with the regulators who have been really supportive of our trials, hence the sandbox success. Now, certified category is planned for 2027, 2028, and that's when we anticipate we will then begin operating this type of capability. We need to be thinking further ahead about what that means for us from a fleet scale perspective. But the uncrewed aircraft and the certified platforms being operated by MPAS is certainly on the roadmap.
David, thank you very much for a fascinating interview. It's been a pleasure having you on Altitude.
No, thank you for having us. It's been great.
I'm joined by Andy Sage, Safety Transformation Director at NATS. Hello, Andy. Welcome to Altitude. Andy, last year you gave us an introduction into the open air concept. Can you start by giving us a bit of a reminder as to what open air is all about?
Yeah, fundamentally open air is about providing a consistent and assured picture of the airspace for everybody. Integrated airspace involves a lot of different stakeholders. So this is a means of sharing all of the necessary data to allow safe flights and safe integration. But at NATS, we can offer commercial independence from all of those downstream service providers and just make sure that there's equitable access to that airspace because it's going to get complicated down at lower airspace.
And Andy, I understand that it is a live project, and when we spoke it was a year ago. What's happened in the last 12 months? What have you guys been up to?
Yeah, it's been a busy year. I think the first thing we did was go out to consultation with the industry later that autumn. We had our own ideas, but we needed to check that we were thinking the right things. And we got some great feedback from industry, some things they agreed with, something they didn't. And we factored all of that into our plans. So we've been doing the design work right now. And we hope to launch the first pilot services next year for testing with some of those customers. It'll be a continual learning process.
So you mentioned customers there. I'm going to assume, are surrounded by them here at DroneX. What does open air mean for drone operators?
For drone operators, I think particularly those that want to fly beyond visual line of sight, it's a real challenge at the moment. Getting safety cases approved can be a difficult and lengthy process. So what we're kind of hoping is that open air will bring a degree of consistency to how some of those risks in the air and on the ground are mitigated without trying to hinder innovation at the same time. It means that also when these operators are flying, they can gain comfort from the fact that they will have knowledge of everyone else that's flying nearby, critical to their safe operation. And also it means that they can continue to choose whatever technical platform they prefer to use to manage their business with, and they don't need a different app for every single airport or every single place they want to fly. They'll be safe in the knowledge that whoever they work with can share the data with whoever is necessary to get them flying.
You mentioned consistency there. Will that lead to a faster application process?
We hope so. I mean, it's only one part of the jigsaw. There's a lot of other things that need to come together. But we've decided at NATS to be proactive, create that data fabric, and hopefully then build the foundations on top of it.
And Andy, there are a lot of airspace users who are not here in the hall today. What does open air mean for airlines and maybe general aviation?
I think we took the very firm decision early on that this stuff was for the benefit of this industry, and therefore we needed to establish a means by which those that will benefit from the service will ultimately pay for it in the long term. So, our message to our airline customers who fund the majority of NATS's regulated activities is that they won't be contributing to that outcome. But for general aviation, it's a frustrating world out there with ever increasing numbers of temporary danger areas that stop them accessing the airspace. If we can find an exit strategy from that, and working under the auspices of the airspace modernization strategy, we can keep them flying autonomously throughout uncontrolled airspace as far as we possibly can.
Thank you, Andy. This is all about the future, I think, today here at DroneX, and the term future flight is used a lot. If we step into the future now, you and I, and we maybe pick a year, let's take 2030.
Yep.
If we're stood here and I ask you the same question, what will open air look like in 2030?
Well, this might sound really odd, but actually I'm rather hoping that it's invisible, that it's kind of become an assumed part of the fabric, that everyone is using it, ideally depending upon it. And I don't say that with any arrogance. I say it because I hope that we will end up providing services that are of real value and people will be happy and willing to pay for through the regulated framework that we're going to be establishing. Much like many other parts of the aviation ecosystem today are invisible to people, they just almost take them for granted. That will be a good sign of success for me.
Thanks, Andy. And you mentioned earlier how you had engaged other stakeholders. I understand that as this is a live project, you're about to go out for another round of consultation. What do you hope to get back from consultation?
Yeah, so this one will be a little bit different. I think we're having got the feedback last time round. I think we're firmer in our ideas of what we need to be building. So this one will be a little bit more about how we fund that service and recover those costs in the long term. What is a very sensitive time for the market in its maybe not infancy, but in its teenage years. And also, this is going to be a long journey. What the market needs today is not the same as what it will need next year or in 2030, as you put it. So we're going to have to also figure out how we work with those customers to develop and evolve the service over time.
And importantly, Andy, how can people get involved in that consultation?
I'll be on stage tomorrow. There'll be a QR code right at the end. People can click on that and get themselves involved, but there'll be plenty of comms coming out where people can get involved and reply to that consultation. And I would urge everybody to do so. The more evidence we have, the better.
Andy, some fantastic insights there and some great messages.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Police Superintendent Taryn Evans has joined us to talk about the work of the National Police Chiefs Council and their drone programme. Hello, Taryn. Welcome to Altitude.
Hello, thanks for having me.
How are you finding the show? You're here at DroneX today.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone here together in one space. It's usually quite a disparate community, so yeah, I'm enjoying it.
And Taryn, you work as part of the National Police Chiefs Council drone programme. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's all about?
Sure. So the National Police Chiefs Council, for those of your listeners that aren't aware, is the umbrella organisation that sits over the 44 Home Office forces across England and Wales. And the drone program, actually called the BVLOS Pathway Program, is looking at how we achieve beyond visual line of sight flight and or semi or fully autonomous drone flight in support of policing operations.
And so, with that in mind, are you already using drones to some extent?
Yes, absolutely. So all but 2 of the 44 forces already have drone teams. And as I said, they're flying quite a bit. They'll go to many of the same tasks you would have expected a helicopter to go to. So that might be oversight of a major incident, public order event, looking for someone, clearing an area in a search. But they're also moving into new areas that we would never have used a helicopter for, like searching inside buildings or things at much lower scale. So, yeah, that's what they're up to.
So you're making some good use of drone technology already. You mentioned that there are 44 constabularies. How do you coordinate the use of drones across all of those different groups?
Well, it's quite a task. I suppose I would say that. They're all operationally and financially independent. So coordinating them is more an effort of negotiating and influencing a way forward under the strategic direction that's set by the chief officer in charge of it all, Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor. So he'll set the direction that we want to go in, and he'll task me with finding a way to get there and deliver it to forces.
Taryn, we know that in the commercial environment, for drone operators to be able to fly beyond the visual line of sight opens up huge commercial opportunities. You're currently working predominantly within the visual line of sight. How is it that you will expect to move into beyond visual line of sight operations?
So the pathway that we've designed is really carefully structured to ensure that we're maintaining safety of operations at every stage, and we're only moving on once we're satisfied. So all of our tests will be visually mitigated, and then slowly we'll remove some of those controls as we're satisfied. The objective for us in achieving BVLOS flight is that we will be able to leverage the resources that we have, which I think everyone knows are thinning, and probably won't change in the near future, to best effect to meet the needs of the people on the end of the phones in our communities. So at the point of need, if you need someone there, whether it's to assess a situation, determine what resources we should send you, whether it's one officer, whether it's 6, whether it's armed officers, whether it's the ambulance service, we would be able to do that as the crow flies much quicker than any resource can currently get there. So if we're able to do that, we magnify, we leverage the resources we already have to help you. It doesn't replace officers, it doesn't replace a conventional response, but it makes it more targeted and efficient. That's the plan.
Okay, and what does the future look like then in terms of future policing with drones? How many can we expect to be in the skies?
Well, that's one of the questions that my trials are seeking to answer. First of all, we need to work out whether or not all of the technology that's available can be used together, whether it integrates. And then we've got to measure the extent to which that helps us in policing, that helps us detect and prevent crime. But all being well, we could probably expect several layers of drone response, the first one of which is autonomous drones that are based on buildings going from call to call, and then other ones that will go to perhaps longer term events or further afield that have slightly greater endurance.
And will the use of those drones be shared between the different emergency services? Thinking here, maybe if there was a big fire, for example, might the police drones work with the fire service?
So interoperability is a key part of our trial, and multi-agency response is embedded into all emergency service operations now, really. So absolutely, it's my plan, and part of the trials is planning to see how the other emergency services would use our drones, but also coming up with a model that enables us to use them for the most appropriate call at the most appropriate time, because you don't want to be doing it for sort of a standard routine call when you've got an emergency happening over here. But a key part of that is checking we can all see the video that comes from it. That's the key bit, giving us that situational awareness where all of us might be located at one scene, so we're seeing the same information at the same time.
Thanks, Taryn. You're here obviously at DroneX. This is a cutting edge industry show. Is the use of drones in policing cutting edge for the operations right now?
Absolutely. It's like I said, we've had conventional air support now for decades, but helicopters are still big, expensive. They require bases with lots of people to service them. drones will give us agility, value for money, a speed of response that we just can't get from helicopters. But that's just for the things we've always used helicopters for. When we then look at other areas that we can get into, more tactical support at the lower level, going inside to such small areas like houses or cars, we're layering advantage upon advantage when we use drones. So yeah, I think it is quite cutting edge.
And what are you most excited about here at the show? What are you looking forward to seeing today?
So a key interest for me is working out how we combine drone and counter-drone. So making sure we can see all the things that are in the sky, either to avoid them or in case they present a risk. And also looking forward to how we use artificial intelligence to take things from a video feed, and automatically identify things that we think would be of more interest to us as police officers.
I'm assuming that within the police activities, there's a need for quick response. How do you balance the need for quick response with a drone against the requirement to safely access airspace?
It's a good question, and it's one that spans all sorts of policing activities. So the example I often use is that of a response car that travels at extraordinary speeds down normal residential roads in order to reach the emergency. Everything we do will be risk that is balanced really carefully. But luckily, it's not just the judgment of one person that will determine how they fly their drone. It will be incorporated into really careful operational procedures and manuals that will be set out by the National Police Chiefs Council, given to forces and audited so that we know that's happening. And the CAA, of course, will then do their third-party assurance and check that we're keeping to it. So whilst we need to maintain the ability to make a decision in the moment to pursue our mission to preserve life, we also need to have really clear parameters so that we know we're operating as safely as possible.
You mentioned the regulator there. How much engagement do you have with the regulator in terms of influencing regulations and the sort of all of the legislative aspects of drone operations?
We work really closely with the regulator. We have regular meetings. Obviously, there's a much bigger ecosystem there linked into the DFT and the future of flight. We're well aware that they're working really hard to design a way forward to enable BVLOS operations, not just for state operators, but also for all of the commercial entities out there. And we're really keen to lend our expertise and all of our flight time and trials to assist with that as best we can.
Darren, thank you so much for joining us on Altitude today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Regulation is crucial in aviation, and I'm joined by Sophie O'Sullivan from the Civil Aviation Authority to talk about their role in the drone industry. Sophie, welcome to Altitude.
Hi, good to be here.
How are you finding DroneX?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, this is probably one of the key events for us across the year because it's just such a good opportunity to engage with the operator community. And they are really the ones that will tell us, are we getting it right? And the things that we're doing to try and make operational authorizations easier, or the stuff that we've been doing around PDRA 01 and that launch, they're the community that will tell us, is it landing? Is it working? And the effort that we're making internally, and believe me, we are making a lot of that, does it make a difference? And so that's really, really key for us.
Fantastic. I understand that you were on a panel earlier as well. How did the panel go?
Yeah, it was great, thank you. There was a lot of background noise,
Okay.
so it wasn't that easy to hear. But it was a really good chance to talk on an all-female panel. I think it might be the first all-female panel at DroneX, so that was great. And we had a chance to really talk about drones unlocking potential for the UK economy, and to talk about what the kind of regulatory blockers were, and just a chance to talk about that across operators, the regulator, obviously, and then, bodies like UKRI. So it was really good.
So it sounds like a really key opportunity for the regulator to engage with the community.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
So in terms of the drone industry, what are the sort of key societal benefits that you foresee in the short term?
So I think we see a lot. The operation we're particularly excited about is London Healthbridge. So they are looking to do hospital-to-hospital transmission of various deliveries that will genuinely help the NHS, and we think have a real, make a real difference to everyday lives. And we have approved that with conditions, and we're quite confident those conditions can be met. So we're really pleased about that, and we see that as a key sector, that kind of enabling the medical community to work in a more efficient way. And then we see all sorts, with the atypical work that we're doing, and that policy's coming out in probably 2 weeks, we think, very, very soon. It's all approved internally. That's where we see the kind of industry that's springing up around surveillance, managing kind of large farms, crops, spraying, all that type of thing. And then obviously there's the industry that's been around for decades. Photography has been around for a very long time. So it's a really multifaceted sector, and our aim is to assist the sector do what it wants to do.
Thank you, Sophie. So you spoke about a particular project there, London Health Bridge. We too are excited about that. We'll be speaking with the project team in the show. And you also spoke about atypical airspace and some particular use cases. I wonder, what's the overarching strategy that the Civil Aviation Authority has to enable all of these benefits to be delivered?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's not an easy challenge. I think if it was, we would have done it, I'd like to think. So our strategy is really about being much clearer about what our overall direction and goal is, so industry understands where we're going. We think that's key if you're trying to build a business, if you're trying to realise, a commercial reality. You need to know where the regulator is going. We see that as key. So our first tenet is really transparency. Then it needs to be having a key programme that helps us realise that the goals behind that transparency. So we would like to see what I would call meaningful routine BV loss by 27. That's what we're really working towards. I do have to caveat that by saying it obviously depends on funding and technological developments and standards developments and all sorts of things that those listening to us now will know very well about. But we thought it was really critical to kind of give that view about where we're looking to go. So that transparency, having those goals that we share. We've published our Pathway to BV Loss today, which talks about how we think we might be able to get there, and then having that funding and building the team around delivering that programme internally, which we've really been doing. And I talked on the panel earlier about how we've really changed the makeup of the CAA team to underpin that programme. We've gone from having a team that approves applications and does policy 6 to 12 months in advance to having a much broader team that does things like test and trial and looks to really partner with operators that are doing interesting and innovative things to see how we can take those learnings and create more complicated policy.
Thank you, Sophie. And it's a huge programme of work, very clearly, and I think anybody who's ever worked on a large programme of work knows that it's not easy. I wonder, what are the main obstacles that you foresee that you need to overcome?
So I'd probably describe them as challenges, but I think we have quite a small island with crowded airspace, and we operate on a basis where we want to give fair and equitable access to that airspace. And we represent a sector here today that has increasing demands on that UK asset. So that is, I really wouldn't describe it as an obstacle. It's a challenge. We have to think about how we do that and how we do that fairly. And we have genuinely different demands from different communities. That can be quite difficult to then build consensus and move forward. So that can be quite tough. Equally, funding, I say this a lot, but we do need to fund that programme. We need to fund the ability to do that. And then we need to have the right culture in the CAA, and that's really what FSI is driving towards. I think those three things are what we need to overcome.
Within all of those aspects, how do the TRA sandbox, how does that fit into that whole piece?
So what we need to be able to do is to test essentially what the proof of concept might be to do some type of meaningful routine BV loss. So if we're going to do that, we need to understand things like, what's our policy going to be for detect and avoid? How are you going to take avoiding action within that scenario? Would you change the rules of the air? I'm just using an example. I'm not saying that we would. What type of UTM services might you need? How might we assure ourselves that the actual drone itself has got the right level of platform integrity? To do and work out what we need to enable that, we need to test, and we need to test those scenarios. And whilst BV loss in a TDA, which is the predominant way of doing it today, has worked for a time, you are doing that in a segregated area. So you are not really testing manned and unmanned traffic together. You aren't really testing those concepts around things like detect and avoid. So TRA for us is the first two tranches of starting to create those operations where we can learn and therefore build out the requirements as to what the BVLOS proof of concept might be, and then how you might scale that up. Some of this stuff might work, some of it might not, and that's what we really need to use it to do. So it's informing that future vision.
Sophie, we mentioned a couple of technical constructs there, one of which was the term TRA. I wonder, could you just explain what that means?
Of course. So a TRA is a temporary reservation area. It's an airspace construct we've launched quite recently at the CAA. And the way I would see it is as a stepping stone towards more complex operations with manned aircraft. So at the moment, we tend to enable beyond visual line of sight using something called a TDA, where typically there won't be much traffic within that. And this is a stepping stone to enabling more complex operations with some requirements that are needed to be fulfilled.
Aviation does love a three-letter acronym.
It does.
You did throw another one in there. So TDA is a temporary danger area.
Yes, yeah.
There are certainly some very exciting projects in the sandbox in both tranches. And you spoke about routine BVLOS being realised by 2027. What happens between the sandboxes and 2027?
Very good question. So what we will need to do is then deliver on our program. So in respect to learning, that's where we will take what we learned from tranche 1 and 2 in the first TRA, and then we will compare that to policy concepts that we're putting out to the operator and broader community. So, for example, we've just closed our consultation on detect and avoid. We will look at the feedback we get from that. We will look at what we've tested in the TRA tranches, and then using all of that, we can work out what our detect and avoid policy will be to get us to 27 and to enable 27. So really, it's going to be a series of program deliveries that will test different concepts with the communities, with those types of testing in TRA, and then create that policy. I've used the example of detect and avoid, but we've got open consultations at the moment around our flight assessment entities, which are about how we get the right integrity for drones and their platforms. Equally, we've got a SailMark consultation out. We've got lots of consultations out all the time, so please do fill them in. And that's effectively what we'll be doing.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks for all of that information on the regulatory framework. We are here at DroneX, and a final question for you about the show. When you get time, you're obviously very busy here at the show, but when you get time to look around, what is it that you're most excited about seeing here?
Honestly, just the amount of people that are still here, that have been here for a number of years. This is a sector that's not going away. And it's been around for decades, whether it's COVID or Brexit or any other kind of macroeconomic trends. We just see this sector as having a real staying power. So honestly, the nicest thing about being here today, I think, is how many people we know, from the CAA that are around, and that makes us excited about the future.
Fantastic. I have to admit, I've been past your stand and it was very busy earlier. So
yeah, we've got 50 people here today, so we've got a good footprint.
Excellent. Sophie, thank you very much for joining us on
No
Altitude. There's a very clever application of drone technology that's taking place in the North Sea. And I'm joined by Charles Taverner from Flylogix and Richard Ellis from NATS to tell us a little bit more. Hello, Charles. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Russell. Hi, Russell.
Welcome to Altitude and welcome to DroneX. How are you finding the show, Charles?
It's very busy so far. It was great to be on the panel earlier on, at the keynote panel, where we were talking about end-to-end, how the beyond visual line of sight operations are being commercialised at scale into the North Sea.
Fantastic, Charles. And for you?
Yeah, no, I haven't stopped. So I walked in and I've just been sort of back to back talking to people, mainly about the stuff Richard's describing, but other opportunities as well. So fantastic.
Excellent. So a good start to the show for you both then. Charles, can we start with a little explanation of what Flylogix do? You're their CEO. Flylogix is a drone operator. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so what we do, Russell, at Flylogix is we use uncrewed aircraft to reduce the cost, the risk and the environmental impact of a range of aviation services. But the thing we started with, and we've spent most of our time on over the last 6 years, is methane emission monitoring. So we fly from the shore out to an oil and gas facility. We fly around it for about 3/4 of an hour, measuring their emissions, and then we come home and provide them and the regulator an accurate report of their emissions. So not only are we focused on reducing emissions of aviation activity, but also the services we provide are reducing the emissions of the energy industry.
So, Charles, it sounds like you have a service offering there that your customers want and are willing to pay for. How have you navigated the kind of regulatory framework to achieve that?
Yeah, so you're right. We're unusual in the BV loss community in that we provide a commercial service today within the regulation. So the regulation, as I guess you're intimating, is relatively in its infancy. It does allow you to do simpler BV loss operations like we do alongside NATS. But what we're seeing in regulation at the moment is a maturing of it that gives us greater flexibility and will in time let us step into more flexible operations like maritime surveillance, fishing patrol, that type of thing.
Thank you, Charles. You mentioned there working with NATS. Richard, new airspace users at NATS. What do NATS services do with Flylogics to enable their mission in the North Sea?
So our role in the North Sea is really to open up the airspace to be an integrated future that will allow all airspace users to safely operate there. Now, if you think about the problem today, we have Aberdeen Airport, which is the busiest heliport in the world, really creating a lot of point-to-point operations out to these 150 offshore assets. In the future, we'll have other vertiports and other operators, such as Flylogics, operating from different locations that are going to have a multiple crossing requirements. So today we provide a segregated airspace for specific operations. Very soon we'll be able to integrate that airspace much more safely and digitally to allow things to grow at scale.
So, Richard, what's required to move from segregated operations to the integrated operations that you talk about there?
Well, there's a number of things. One thing is obviously we need a good surveillance infrastructure. So we need to be able to see cooperative and ideally non-cooperative activity going on. We also need to be able to keep our existing users safe through the traditional air traffic control piece that we operate at Aberdeen Airport today. And then be able to handle the scale and volume through a more digitally integrated future.
Richard, we heard from Andy Sage, also from NATS earlier on, and he spoke about something called open air. What's the kind of difference between what you're describing and what Andy spoke about with open air earlier?
Well, the two are very complementary. So NATS Open Air is handled by the regulatory side of NATS as opposed to the commercial side. And that's about providing a national infrastructure layer of data that will allow service providers such as NATS services on the commercial side of the business to have a common set of data that we're using to understand airspace constructs, traffic, and various other services. I think they're looking to trial that fairly soon. We will certainly be someone looking very closely at how we utilize that foundational service for the.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Exciting times at NATS. Charles, turning back to you, a couple of questions on the regulation, if I may. The regulator, our Civil Aviation Authority, have recently published some guidance material. It was focused on pathways for BV loss or beyond visual line of sight operations. How do you see the temporary constructs and measures that are outlined in that guidance becoming normalized such that operators such as yourself can scale up?
Yeah, so the CAA have set a helpful timeline. And what we need to do is we need to go out and do real operations in order to build a data set. So that roadmap where we move from the type of operations we do today, segregated with a lot of oversight from NATS, to an unsegregated TRA model, and then through to a ubiquitous TMZ, gives us a very clear pathway, gives our customers confidence that we can expand those operations and allows this to unfold.
You mentioned that expanding your operations. Just how many drones can we expect to see servicing the North Sea?
Well, as Richard talked about, there are 150 assets in the North Sea. There is a requirement to measure the emissions of those regularly, so you can do the maths there. There are other applications. Someone talked earlier in our session about delivery of critical components. There are all of the fishing surveillance, security surveillance. There are a very, very large number of potential operations in a body just a body like the North Sea.
Maybe if I can add to that, we already have a number of other operators who are desperate to come and start providing some of these use cases. And that is the key for us, is starting to get from one operator to many operators at scale. The use cases are there, the demand is there. We're working through a safe gentle process to start to help our regulator and ourselves learn in a way that we can safely integrate all of those uses together.
Charles, you spoke there about regulations. If there was one thing that you could wish for from the regulator to do tomorrow, what would it be?
It would obviously be the methodical move to unsegregated airspace. They've set out a roadmap, they've set out a timetable. What we need to do is commit to that and deliver that.
Thank you, Charles. And perhaps a final one for you. When we last spoke on Altitude, you spoke about your daughter and her aspirations to follow in her father's footsteps as an engineer in the aviation industry. How's she getting on with that?
So that project's still going well. She's been reviewing photos and looking through what we're doing at FlyLogix. Maybe one day she can take over the family business.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Fantastic answers. Thank you both for joining us on Altitude. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, Russell.
Skies Without Limits, possibly the go-to economic summary of the UK drone industry, and I'm joined by its author, Craig Roberts from PwC. Craig, hello and welcome to Altitude.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Craig, we're here at DroneX. How are you finding the show?
Yeah, it seems a lot busier this year. Quite a few exciting achievements as well, so yeah, enjoying it.
Craig, you are the author of the Skies Without Limits report. It was first published in 2018. What would you say has changed in that time?
Not as much as we would like, I think, is the summary. I think in 2018 we saw a future which had perhaps faster progress in things like regulation and technology, and we've seen progress, but perhaps not at the pace we see internationally.
Okay, and in that report, you did cite some big numbers, 900,000 drones taken to the UK skies in 2030, the creation of 650,000 jobs, and I think 43 billion added to the UK economy. Do PwC, do you still stand by those numbers?
Yeah, so Skies Without Limits, we certainly stand behind the numbers. The economic analysis is absolutely rock solid. But what we find a lot is that people misunderstand the report. What we're doing in the report is we're saying, okay, let's imagine an economy that doesn't adopt drones and one that does. Then let's assume an S-curve of adoption, which is the standard technology adoption curve. And let's assume that the barriers to growth, things like perception, implementation, technology, regulation, and skills, let's assume those barriers are removed. Then the economy could achieve 45 billion GDP over that economy that hasn't adopted drones. So the key thing, and we'll talk about this I'm sure in a second, our new report is trying to ask the question whether these barriers have been addressed adequately. The number's still there, but how far to the right has it pushed?
So Craig, you mentioned the new report. I understand that you are about to launch it. Can you give us any headlines from that report?
Yeah, I can. The first thing to say is this is a qualitative report rather than quantitative. So what we've done in Skies Without Limits version 2, the 2022 report, we had a whole bunch of exciting startups and some government entities like the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and the Environment Agency. And those case studies really resonated with a lot of people who actually read the report. So we thought this time, let us ask those exciting startups and government entities, how have things changed for you from 2021 to 2024? How do you feel things have progressed? And so we're trying to answer the question in the report, has the UK drone industry progressed in the last 3 years or not? So what the report does is it asks these entities for their experience. Are they at commercial volume? How hard is it to get approval for things like BVLOS in the UK? How does your experience in the UK compare to your experience internationally? And we've kind of wrapped that all up. And we have some really exciting headlines. We have things like daily BVLOS, which is fantastic. We have BVLOS that's routine in unsegregated airspace. Sounds great. We have drones spraying and seeding crops. Also fantastic. Wasn't happening in 2021. We even have one company saying they've got an automotive-like production facility for drones in the UK, so high is their demand. However, when you look behind the headlines, you find it's a little bit more nuanced. So the daily BVLOS is actually the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, and they have a 2 million square mile patrol area. Their TDA for daily BVLOS is 0.05% of that area, and they can only do it routine. They can't do it for emergencies. So it sounds great, but not so great. And then you find that companies that focus on BVLOS, if they want to grow, they've got to be internationally focused. They can only generate growth elsewhere. And then with the chemical spraying, it's fantastic, but it's not the controlled chemicals they can spray it because it's quite difficult to get permission. So progress, but not quite. The automotive style production line. That sounds fantastic. But again, the demand is driven internationally rather than the UK. So some really enticing headlines, some wonderful company stories, but also a few things I think we can learn in the UK from what's happening internationally.
And does the report outline those learnings?
It does, absolutely. And the key learnings, I mean, I think summarizing quite a lot of text here, the UK's attitude to risk and where it places the onus is different to, for example, the US. I'll give you one example from one of the companies who we discussed a little bit earlier. And they said, okay, we wanted to get BVLOS permission for atypical in the US. 50-page submission, 2 months, approved, done. In the UK, same thing, BVLOS, atypical, this is power line inspection, 1,600-page submission, 5 months later, still working their way through the oversight report. So it's a contrast. That same company also thinks that the UK wants to put the risk on the CAA, where they, as the FAA in the US, they want the risk to be on the drone service provider. And that whole sort of attitude to risk, the commercial focus, seems to be different. So I think there's lots of exciting things happening in the UK. There is definitely progress from 21 to 24, but there are things we can learn internationally, things we can simplify to really accelerate the progress and try and hit that very high number.
Thanks, Craig. So you talked there a lot about what drone operators can do and a focus on the drone technology. Are the industries who are about to receive that drone tech, are they ready?
Yeah, I think much more so. So last year we published a report which is the industrial perception of drones. So we went to industry and we said, okay, what do you guys think of drones? And it was a follow-up to a report from a few years earlier. And the increase in the positive perception of drones was quite stellar. And so in this report, again, we find the same thing. Perception is the thing that's improved the most from 21 to 24. And so we're seeing a normalization of drones. We're seeing drone end clients really understanding the benefits and starting to pool. So that's really encouraging. However, the implementation barrier to growth, that's still a challenge. You know, the key thing with drones, if we're not talking about delivery drones or middle mile or last mile, we're talking about drones for survey or inspection. The key thing is actually integrating that drone data with business as usual. And that's still not quite happening. So the full benefit's not quite being squeezed out of drones yet, but it's definitely progressing.
Well, it certainly sounds like progress, but there's obviously still some work to be done. Taking a slightly different tack then, talking about maybe the global perspective, I see that PwC operate in 151 countries worldwide. How does the UK drone industry stack up to the rest of the world?
Well, PwC has quite a big drone presence. We have a Centre of Excellence in Poland. And I think the Polish example is very interesting. So I've talked about the UK perhaps being more risk averse, but also they've got different views of technology. So for example, in Poland, way back in 2020, they implemented UTM. It was mandatory. And so UTM has been a foundational technology. And last year they had 700,000 flights and 23.5K of those were BVLOS flights. And so that's an approach taken by Poland, which has helped them to accelerate drone adoption. In the UK, we have UTM as part of the Future of Flight Action Plan, but it's part of a suite of measures rather than being a driving technology. So this Polish team has published a report on global UTM. That's one of the key findings. It's a real assistance, a real technology boost to the progression of drones in any country that adopts it. And in the UK, unlike Europe, unlike America, we're not perhaps seeing it that way. So the UTM is just one example, but generally speaking, it's a little easier to fly elsewhere. And so as I mentioned before in this report, we see a lot of companies who are, if they're innovating in the UK, they've got some fantastic technology, but to really grow, they have to sell elsewhere.
Craig, thank you so much for joining us on Altitude, and thank you for sharing some of the highlights from your new report. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Collaboration is often cited as the key to unlocking the future of flight, and I'm joined by two companies who have been doing just that. Louisa Smith from Apian and Matt Satterley from Wing. Louisa, Matt, welcome to Altitude.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be here.
I've spoken to both of you previously. We're back at DroneX. How are you finding the show so far?
Yeah, I think this year there's a lot more people here, I think, and so it's really nice, and you're seeing the different organisations amongst each other, so the helicopter stuff is integrated in, which is really good to see.
Thanks, Louisa. And Matt?
Yeah, I think I've spent the entire day meeting with people. It's always a great convening spot, DroneX Conference, so happy to be here again this year.
Fantastic stuff. And I understand that you have brought big news this time. We saw an announcement recently about the London Health Bridge. Louisa, could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so the London Heath Bridge, we've just got airspace approval with conditions from the Civil Aviation Authority to start operations in a few weeks' time. So the London Heath Bridge is predominantly between Appian and Guy's and St Thomas Hospital and Wing, our UAS operator for the trial. They have sites at Guy's, which is near the Shard, and St Thomas, which is near Westminster, and we'll be delivering pathology, mostly blood samples, between the two healthcare sites. So samples for patients that require either operations or have bleeding control disorders or having a transplant, for example, will be their bloods are taken at Guy's and then they get tested at St Thomas Hospital. So we'll be doing that transit by drone for a period of 6 months.
Fantastic. And how many drones per day are you expecting to fly?
So we've limited the trial because it's a trial base. We're just doing 10 flights a day. They'll be operating between the hours of 9 and 4. And they'll be actually operating in a temporary reserved area, which was the airspace that we've gone through with the Civil Aviation Authority for authorisation. We've been working with NATS and Wing to make sure we've got the right processes and procedures in place. And then that's where the operations will be taking place.
Thank you. Matt, Louisa mentioned that Appian are working closely with Wing. What experience do you have of doing this elsewhere around the world?
Yeah, so obviously the London airspace is very unique, and this is going to be something quite new for us, but we've been operating drones for the past several years. We've amassed over 400,000 commercial flights across 3 continents. And so in some bit, this will be a little routine. Wing has been delivering healthcare products starting during the pandemic. We delivered some basic healthcare items that people needed in their homes at the start of COVID. And then for the past several months, we've actually been working with Appian in Dublin with partner Medtronic. And so that's been a really exciting and informative project for us as we get ready to set sail here in London.
Matt, sticking with you for the next question. The airspace over London is complex. London is home to millions of people and people who are going about their daily lives here. So I expect that safety is a major consideration for the project. What have you done to address the safety implications of the project?
Yeah, safety obviously is paramount in any aviation operation, and that's true for Wing and for Appian as well. We do an extensive amount of community outreach primarily to try and get to know the community where we're operating. Drones operate differently than helicopters and your traditional fixed-wing aircraft, and so for us it's really important that we get to know the community we're operating in, and we're doing so in a responsible manner. But the aircraft is also incredibly redundant. We have a very strong safety case that CAA has assessed, and we hope we'll be approving shortly. And that's based on the number of redundancies we've built in and the safety mitigations on the aircraft. And then we have a complex UTM and flight planning system on board the aircraft as well that makes sure that we're operating safely with other airborne users.
Thank you, Matt. Sticking with the airspace side of things, Louisa, what work have you done with NATS to enable this flight in such busy skies?
Yeah, so we, as you said, we've been working with NATS for some time now to look, obviously, as they control all the aircraft in that area. But actually, when you say it's really busy, the area that we're actually trying to operate in, which is below 450 feet, is notoriously not actually that busy. A lot of crewed aviation aren't actually legally allowed to fly in that airspace. Actually, the ones that can fly are people like London, like, the air ambulances or Met Police. And we have a really good relationship with all those. We've spoken to them already, and they've been super supportive. We've got procedures in place with them all, with NATS as well, so that if they need to respond in an emergency within the airspace that we're operating, we will remove and stop our operations to allow them in, and that will happen really quickly. So it's around working with the traditional crewed aviation who are allowed to work in that airspace to make sure that we've got the right procedures in place to allow them to operate. And NATS have been really supportive on how we've done that and operated with them.
Thank you. It certainly seems like a very clever application of technology and a use case that I'm sure public are very supportive of. But it does seem like an awful lot of effort in terms of moving, delivering anything at just a few miles. What are the key benefits that you're hoping to deliver?
So I think traditionally we pick up on the time element. So this does have a time element to it. The transfer can normally take about 30 minutes, and we can get it down to 2, which is amazing.
Wow.
But there are obviously other benefits to it as well. So there's around the logistics and how healthcare actually works, and making sure that they can get the on-demand delivery, get the responses, get the feedback and test results quickly to be able to help and assist on whether they can discharge people quicker from after their operations, which obviously then alleviates bed space, but it also means the productivity for the healthcare clinicians, all those other people who are working, do the great work, can actually really focus on treating the patients rather than organising transfer of goods.
This project has certainly attracted a lot of attention. I think there was a BBC article, and there's lots of news of it on social media. So you certainly captured the attention. Has that felt good and as part of the project?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to get for people to get excited about it, and for friends and families to comment and say, "Is this you guys?" So that's really good. But we really want to save the kind of the benefits and the actual flying that will speak for itself when we're there and when we're operating in a few weeks' time.
Of course. So in terms of DroneX, a final question for you both. We're here, Europe's biggest drone exhibition. Louisa, what are you most excited about, here at the show?
I think there's a lot of buzz around what's going on. I think I'm amazed by how many people are aware of our project, for example, and talking about how that's going to impact and change stuff for the future as well. So there's definitely a buzz around what we can move forward. I think the CAA has done a huge amount of work over the last few years to get into a position now, and the industry is ready, kind of on waiting.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think perfect answer from Louisa. It feels tangible and it feels within reach, I think, for a lot of the people who are here from industry. Certainly, we've worked very hard. CA have worked hard. Appian has worked hard to make this a reality that we expect to happen very soon. And I think that it sends a strong signal to the rest of industry that this is going to be very achievable in the near term.
Thank you. And thank you both for joining us on Altitude. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks, Russell.